Ivy Reynolds had exactly $12 in her bank account, a past-due electric bill stuffed in her apron, and a Mafia Boss standing 3 feet away offering her $100,000 in cash. And the word that came out of her mouth was the one word no one had ever said to Silas Kane and lived to repeat. No, but we need to go back. Rewind the clock by exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes. Because the moment that satisfying single syllable left her lips, the moment that changed everything, started the way most disasters do. With something small, something ordinary, something she almost missed entirely. The diner sat on the edge of Chicago's industrial corridor, a stretch of cracked pavement and forgotten warehouses where the city's pulse faded into silence. Gino's all-night grill had no business still existing. The vinyl booths were held together with duct tape and denial. The coffee tasted like regret. The neon sign outside flickered between open and penned, depending on whether the wind was feeling generous, but it stayed open 24 hours because the owner owed money to people who preferred their diners operational. And Ivy stayed employed because she never asked questions and always showed up. That night, her shift had crawled past midnight with only 6 customers and a grand total of $14 in tips. She was wiping down the counter, watching the clock like it owed her money, when she noticed something wedged beneath the booth in the far corner. The leather seat dipped inward there, a result of years of heavy bodies and heavier secrets, and whatever had fallen had slipped into the gap like it wanted to stay hidden. Ivy almost left it. Almost clocked out and let the morning girl deal with whatever forgotten phone or crumpled jacket some drunk had abandoned. But something about the weight of it made her pause. She reached beneath the seat, fingers brushing against smooth leather, and pulled out a wallet. Heavy, dense, wrong. She carried it behind the counter before opening it. Away from the cook's line of sight, away from the security camera that had stopped working 3 years ago but still blinked its little red lie. When she flipped it open, her breath caught somewhere between her throat and her chest and refused to move. Cash. Stacks of it. Crisp bills bound in paper bands packed so tightly the leather strained at the seams. She did not count it. She did not need to. The number screamed at her from every perfectly aligned edge. This was more money than she had ever touched. More than she would earn in 5 years of double shifts and aching feet, and smiling at men who looked through her like she was furniture. Ivy closed the wallet immediately. Her hands were trembling, not from excitement, from recognition. She had grown up broke in a city that punished poverty like a personal failing. Her mother had chased every opportunity, every miracle, every too-good-to-be-true promise that floated through their apartment door, and every single one had come with teeth. The landlord who offered to forgive 3 months of rent if her mother would just be friendly. The boss who promised a promotion if she stayed late, stayed quiet, stayed grateful. The boyfriend who bought groceries and expected ownership in return. Ivy learned young that money like this did not belong to careless people. It belonged to dangerous ones. The kind who did not panic when something went missing because they had other ways of getting it back. She shoved the wallet beneath the register and told herself to breathe. Before we go any further, do me a quick favor. Like this video and drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far Ivy's story travels tonight because trust me, you are going to want to be part of this conversation by the end. For the next hour, Ivy moved through her closing routine like a woman walking through water. She refilled the ketchup bottles. She married the salt shakers. She swept the floor and pretended the weight beneath the register did not exist. Every time the door opened, her heart slammed against her ribs. Every time it was just wind or a stray cat or nothing at all, she exhaled and started the cycle again. She thought about taking it. Of course she did. $100,000 could erase every debt, every sleepless night, every moment she had spent calculating whether she could afford both electricity and food in the same week. It could buy her a new name in a new city where no one knew the girl who had grown up hungry and ashamed. It could buy her freedom. But freedom bought with someone else's money was never free. Ivy knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat. Whoever owned this wallet would come looking, and when they found her, because people like that always found you, the price would be higher than anything those bills could cover. So she left it, untouched, uncounted, a grenade with the pin still in, sitting 3 inches from her hip. She told herself she would leave it for the morning shift. Let someone else decide. Let someone else carry the weight of that choice. But an hour later the door opened, and the man who walked in made her realize the decision had already been made for her. He did not rush. That was the first thing Ivy noticed. Every other customer who walked into Gino's at this hour moved with the desperate energy of people running from something. Bad decisions, empty apartments, the kind of loneliness that only a greasy diner at 2 in the morning could temporarily cure. But this man moved like time answered to him, not the other way around. The door swung open and the temperature in the room shifted. Not literally, but something in the air tightened, contracted, pulled inward like the diner itself was holding its breath. Ivy's fingers froze on the rag she had been using to wipe the counter. Eddie Morrow, the only other customer left, a retired trucker who came in every Thursday for decaf and silence, lowered his coffee cup and suddenly became very interested in the laminated menu he had memorized 6 years ago. The man stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to inventory every corner, every exit, every soul in the room. His eyes moved with the precision of someone who had learned to assess threats before they materialized, and when his gaze landed on Ivy, she felt it like a physical weight pressing against her chest. Early 40s, tall enough to command attention, built lean beneath a coat that cost more than 3 months of her rent, dark hair silvering at the temples in a way that suggested distinguished rather than aged. His face carried the kind of stillness that came from years of making decisions other men feared to consider. No smile, no frown. Just absolute, terrifying control. He walked toward the counter. His shoes made no sound on the cracked linoleum, or maybe they did, and Ivy simply could not hear anything over the blood rushing through her ears. Behind her, the cook had disappeared into the back, suddenly remembering inventory that needed counting. Eddie Morrow left a $5 bill on his table and slipped out the side door without making eye contact with anyone. The man stopped 3 feet from where Ivy stood, close enough for her to smell cedar and smoke and something metallic she did not want to identify. He did not sit. He did not lean against the counter. He simply existed in that space like he had been carved from marble and placed there by someone who understood the architecture of intimidation. Did anyone turn in a wallet? His voice matched the rest of him, low, unhurried, stripped of anything unnecessary. No please, no explanation. Just the question, delivered with the quiet confidence of a man who already knew the answer and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. Ivy's mouth went dry. Every instinct she had, cultivated over 24 years of survival, screamed at her to lie, to shake her head, shrug her shoulders, play dumb, and let him walk back out into the night where he belonged. But she could feel the weight of that wallet beneath the register like a second heartbeat, and she understood with sudden clarity that lying to this man would be the last mistake she ever made. She reached beneath the counter. Her fingers found the leather, still warm from where it had pressed against the wood. She placed it on the counter between them, careful not to let her hand shake, careful not to let him see how terrified she truly was. His eyes dropped to the wallet, then back to her face, then back to the wallet. Something flickered behind his expression. Confusion, maybe, or something closer to disbelief. His fingers reached for the leather but stopped just short of touching it, hovering in the space above like he expected it to disappear. You found it?
Yes. You didn't look inside.
Ivy hesitated. She could lie, she probably should lie, but something about the way he watched her, the way his eyes catalogued every micro-expression that crossed her face, told her that dishonesty would cost more than the truth. I did, she said quietly. I still returned it. The silence that followed lasted only 4 seconds, but it stretched across the distance between them like a canyon. Silas Kane, though Ivy did not know his name yet, did not understand the weight it carried in rooms far more dangerous than this one, studied her the way a scientist studies an anomaly, something that should not exist according to every law he had built his life around. He picked up the wallet, opened it, counted nothing, checked nothing, simply confirmed with a glance that everything remained exactly as it should be. Then he closed it and set it back on the counter between them. There's a reward, he said. Ivy had imagined this moment during the hour she spent waiting. She had rehearsed polite refusals, practiced grateful smiles, prepared explanations about honesty and integrity, and all the things people said when they wanted to seem noble. But standing here, facing this man whose presence made the air feel heavier, none of those rehearsed words would come, so she simply pushed the wallet back toward him with the same calm he had entered with. No. The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Silas Kane's hand remained on the counter. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted. A recalculation, a reassessment, the mental equivalent of a machine encountering data it could not process. He was not accustomed to this. Ivy could see it in the slight tension at the corner of his jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his gaze. Men like him lived in a world where everything had a price and everyone had an angle. Fear, greed, ambition, desperation. These were currencies he understood, languages he spoke fluently, but Ivy offered none of them. She simply stood there, a 24-year-old waitress with $12 to her name, and wanted nothing from him except distance. Silas slid the wallet back toward her. There's a reward, he repeated, as if perhaps she had not understood the first time. Ivy pushed it away again. No, And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Silas Kane did not know what to say. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. Silas Kane did not move, did not blink, did not do any of the things normal people did when a conversation reached an impasse. He simply stood there, processing her refusal the way a computer processes an error code, with quiet, methodical intensity. Ivy could feel him searching, not physically, but mentally, turning her over in his mind like a puzzle box with no visible seams. She had seen that look before on the faces of landlords calculating how much desperation they could extract from a late rent check, on the faces of men who bought her drinks and expected receipts. But Silas Kane was not calculating desperation, he was calculating something far more dangerous. He was trying to find her angle. The money in that wallet, he said slowly, is more than you would make in 5 years at this job, probably closer to 7. Ivy said nothing. You could pay off debts, move somewhere safer, start over without the weight of whatever it is you're running from. Still nothing. Her hands remained flat on the counter, steady despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. Silas tilted his head slightly, a predator adjusting its perspective on prey that refused to behave according to instinct. If money doesn't interest you, perhaps something else. Protection. Opportunity. A favor owed by someone who always pays his debts. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ivy understood what he meant. A favor from a man like this could open doors that did not exist for people like her. It could erase problems before they became catastrophes. It could guarantee safety in a city that had never guaranteed her anything except disappointment. But favors from men like this came with interest rates that compounded in blood. I don't want your money, Ivy said quietly. I don't want your protection. I don't want to owe you anything, and I don't want you to owe me. Silas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Everyone wants something, not from you. The words landed harder than she intended. She watched something shift behind his eyes. Not anger, not offense, but a recalibration so subtle she would have missed it if she had not been watching so closely. Silas Kane was a man who had built his entire empire on a single foundational truth. Every person had a price, and every price could be paid. He had purchased loyalty, silence, violence, and forgiveness in quantities most people could not imagine. He had never once encountered a transaction he could not complete, until now. Why? The question came out rougher than his previous words, stripped of the polish that coated everything else he said. You looked inside. You know what you're refusing. So why? Ivy considered lying, considered crafting some noble explanation about honesty and integrity. The kind of answer that would make sense to someone who measured the world in profit and loss. But she was too tired for performance, too worn down by the weight of the night and the $12 in her bank account and the man standing in front of her who could probably end her life with a single phone call. So she told him the truth. I don't want to be remembered, she said softly. I just want to go home. The confession settled between them like dust after an explosion. Silas stared at her. And for the first time since he had walked through that door, Ivy saw something other than calculation in his expression. She saw recognition, the flicker of a man who understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant to want invisibility in a world that demanded your presence. He did not respond, did not argue, did not try again. Instead, he picked up the wallet, slid it into his coat pocket, and stepped back from the counter. The distance between them expanded from 3 feet to 6. But the tension did not ease. If anything, it tightened further, coiling around Ivy's ribs like a fist. Thank you, he said. The words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he had learned but rarely used. For your honesty. Ivy nodded once. She did not trust herself to speak. Silas turned toward the door, stopped, looked back over his shoulder at the waitress who had just done something no one in his memory had ever done, touched his world and refused to enter it. What's your name? Every instinct screamed at her to lie, to give him something false, something untraceable, something that would let her disappear back into the anonymity she had spent years cultivating. But she had already told him the truth once tonight. One more would not change anything. Ivy, she said. Ivy Reynolds, riding radio shoes in the fishes and singing the swords. Riding radio de chords, sunshines of galaxy sides, swinging shut behind him with a sword spinning them so far with another word. The door swinging shut behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot. Ivy stood alone in the empty diner, heart pounding, hands finally trembling now that there was no one left to witness it. She finished her closing duties on autopilot, locked the doors and walked to her car in a parking lot that felt darker than it had an hour ago. She did not see him standing in the shadows near the dumpsters, did not see him watching her tail lights disappear down the empty street, did not see the expression on his face, something between confusion and fascination and a hunger he could not name. Silas Kane stood in that parking lot long after Ivy Reynolds vanished into the night. The wallet pressed against his chest, $100K returned by a woman who had nothing and wanted less. He told himself he would forget her by morning, told himself she was an anomaly, a statistical outlier, a glitch in the pattern of human behavior he had mastered decades ago. But 3 days later, Silas Kane was still thinking about the waitress who wanted nothing, and that was when he made a decision that would change both of their lives. Ivy's apartment sat above a laundromat in a part of Chicago that the city had forgotten to include on tourist maps. The building leaned slightly to the left, as if exhausted by decades of holding itself upright against neglect. The stairs creaked in 3 specific places she had memorized her first week there. 2nd step, 7th step, the landing before her door. Sounds that served as her personal alarm system whenever someone approached. She unlocked the door and stepped inside without turning on the lights. She did not need them. The room was small enough that she could navigate it blindfolded, a twin bed pushed against the wall, a mini fridge that hummed too loudly, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a single window that looked out onto an alley where nothing good ever happened after midnight. Home. If you could call 400 square feet of survival by that name. Ivy sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her work clothes, still smelling like coffee and grease and the faint cedar scent that had clung to the man in the tailored coat. She should shower. She should eat something. She should do any of the normal things normal people did after a shift that had not included returning $100,000 to a stranger whose presence made the air feel heavier. Instead, she sat in the dark and replayed every moment. His eyes, the way they had catalogued her like inventory, the confusion when she refused, the sound of her own name leaving her lips before she could stop it. Ivy Reynolds. She had given him her real name. Why had she given him her real name? Because you were tired. A voice in her head answered. Because for one stupid moment you forgot the rules you spent your whole life learning. The rules. She had started building them when she was 7 years old, the year her father disappeared. His name was Michael, though she rarely let herself think it anymore. He had been a dreamer in a city that punished dreams with compound interest, a small business loan that became a second mortgage that became a debt to men who did not send collection notices through the mail. Ivy remembered the night he left. Not the words, not the explanation, just the sound of the front door closing at 3 a.m, and the silence that followed it for the rest of her childhood. Her mother handled the absence the way she handled everything, by chasing the next opportunity, the next miracle, the next man who promised solutions without mentioning their cost. Ivy watched her accept help from landlords who expected payment in ways that had nothing to do with money. She watched her take loans from friends who became strangers the moment repayment came due. She watched her build a life on borrowed kindness and then lose everything when the interest accumulated beyond what any human being could afford. By the time Ivy turned 16, she understood the mathematics of survival. Money created chains, kindness created obligation, names created targets. The only way to stay free was to stay invisible, to need nothing from anyone, to build a life so small and quiet that the world would simply pass over you like water over stone. So that was exactly what she did. She graduated high school with grades good enough for scholarships she never applied for, because applications required addresses and references and histories she could not afford to have documented. She worked jobs that paid cash, under tables that did not ask questions. She rented apartments from landlords who preferred tenants without credit checks. She kept no social media, no memberships, no loyalty cards that tracked purchases and built profiles. She existed in the margins of a city that ran on visibility, a ghost in a machine designed to catalogue every living soul. It was lonely. God, it was lonely. Some nights she lay in bed and ached for connection so deeply she could feel it in her bones like a fever. She wanted friends who knew her real birthday. She wanted a phone number someone would call for reasons other than shift coverage. She wanted to matter to someone in a way that did not come with conditions or expiration dates. But wanting was dangerous. Wanting made you reach for things that could be taken away. And Ivy had learned, through years of watching her mother reach and lose. So when she sat in that diner with $100,000 beneath the register, she did not see money. She saw a chain being forged. She saw a name being written in a ledger that men like the one in the tailored coat kept locked in their minds. She saw every wall she had spent years building crumble under the weight of a debt she could never fully repay. She refused not because she was strong, she refused because she was terrified. Because accepting his reward would mean existing in his world, and his world had rules she did not understand and consequences she could not survive. Now pause for a moment and think about this. If you were Ivy, broke and exhausted and staring down more money than you had ever seen, would you have done the same thing? Would you have pushed it back and walked away? Or would you have taken that chance and hoped for the best? Like this video and tell me your honest answer in the comments, because I genuinely want to know where you stand before we go any further. For 3 days after that night, Ivy moved through her life like nothing had changed. She worked her shifts. She paid her rent in cash. She ate ramen noodles and off-brand cereal, and told herself that the encounter at the diner was a closed chapter, a story that had ended the moment she watched those taillights disappear into the darkness. She told herself the man with the heavy gaze had already forgotten her name. She almost believed it. Then she arrived at work on the 4th morning and found a black envelope waiting on the counter. No name, no return address, just 2 words written in silver ink across the front. Thank you. Ivy's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, she found a single brass key and a handwritten note in the same silver script. The note contained an address. Nothing else. No explanation, no demand. Just coordinates to a location she did not recognize and a key to a door she had never seen. And beneath those 2 words, beneath the thank you that should have felt like closure, Ivy Reynolds realized with sickening certainty that her invisible life had just become very, very visible. Silas Kane's penthouse occupied the 52nd floor of a building that did not appear on any official registry. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of Chicago that most people would never see. The city sprawled beneath him like a circuit board. Every light a transaction, every street a vein carrying commerce and ambition and blood to destinations he often controlled. He stood at those windows now, a glass of bourbon untouched in his hand, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Behind him, his office hummed with the quiet efficiency of an empire that never slept. Encrypted phones, secure servers. Men who entered through unmarked doors and left with instructions that would reshape lives before morning. 3 days had passed since the diner. 3 days of meetings with lawyers who charged by the syllable and accountants who laundered numbers into legitimacy. 3 days of decisions that determined whether businesses thrived or collapsed, whether men walked free or disappeared into systems designed to forget them. And through every meeting, every decision, every careful calculation, his mind kept returning to the same place. A cracked linoleum counter, a flickering neon sign, a woman with steady hands and tired eyes who had pushed $100,000 away like it carried a disease. No, the word echoed through his memory with a persistence that bordered on obsession. He had heard that word before, of course, in negotiations that required recalibration, in refusals that demanded creative persuasion. But those versions of no always came wrapped in subtext, fear disguised as principle, greed disguised as caution, ambition disguised as reluctance. Every no he had ever encountered was simply a yes waiting for the right pressure. Ivy Reynolds had offered none of that. Her refusal contained no negotiation, no hidden door left open for future offers. She had looked at everything he represented, power, money, possibility, and wanted none of it. She had simply wanted to go home. The thought unsettled him in ways he could not fully articulate. You wanted to see me. Silas turned from the window. Nico Vance stood in the doorway, a manila folder tucked beneath his arm, and an expression that suggested he already knew what this meeting concerned. Nico had worked for Silas for 15 years, rising from street-level enforcement to the position of his most trusted advisor. He knew Silas better than anyone alive, which meant he also knew when something had shifted beneath the surface. The waitress, Silas said. From Gino's. Nico crossed the room and placed the folder on the desk. Ivy Reynolds, 24 years old, born in Chicago, raised on the South Side. Mother deceased, overdose 6 years ago. Father's whereabouts unknown, presumed abandoned the family when she was a child. Silas opened the folder. The file inside was thin, barely a dozen pages, most of them official records that revealed almost nothing. Birth certificate, high school transcript, employment history scattered across cash-based jobs that left no paper trail. No current debt under her name, Nico continued. No credit cards, no loans, no mortgage. No social media presence. No registered vehicle. She pays rent in cash to a landlord who accepts tenants without background checks. Utilities are included, so no accounts there either. Silas studied the photograph clipped to the first page. A driver's license photo, expired 2 years ago, and never renewed. Ivy stared at the camera with the same expression she had worn at the diner, guarded, watchful, revealing nothing. She's a ghost, Nico said, intentionally. Someone taught her how to disappear, or she figured it out herself. Silas closed the folder. She's not running from law enforcement. No, her record is clean. Not even a parking ticket. She's not running from debt collectors. No, she's never borrowed anything substantial enough to warrant collection. Silas walked to his desk and sat down, the leather chair creaking beneath his weight. He had seen this pattern before, the deliberate erasure of digital footprint, the cash-based existence, the careful avoidance of anything that created traceable records. He had seen it in witnesses who testified against the wrong people, in informants who outlived their usefulness, in men and women who had touched his world and learned, often too late, that visibility was a liability. But Ivy Reynolds had not touched his world. She did not know who he was. The name Silas Kane meant nothing to her. He had watched her face when he stood at that counter, and there had been no recognition, no fear beyond the instinctive wariness that any woman alone at 2 a.m. would feel toward a stranger. She was not hiding from him, she was hiding from everything. The realization landed somewhere in his chest and refused to move. He had built his empire on the fundamental principle that every person wanted something: money, power, safety, revenge, love, escape. The currency varied, but the hunger was universal. Find what someone wanted, and you found the lever that moved them. It was mathematics. It was science. It was the closest thing to certainty that existed in a world built on chaos and violence. Ivy Reynolds broke that certainty. She had looked at $100,000, more money than she would earn in years of exhausting labor, and seen only a trap. She had looked at a man whose name made powerful people flinch and seen only a stranger she wanted distance from. Silas told himself his interest was practical. The wallet she returned contained information that could have destroyed him: account numbers, contact lists, leverage he had been carrying to a meeting that ended badly enough to make him careless. Anyone who touched that wallet was a potential threat, a loose end that required assessment. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. He could not stop thinking about her, about the way she stood her ground without aggression, about the steadiness in her hands when everything else about her situation should have made her tremble, about the quiet resignation in her voice when she said she wanted to go home, as if home was not a place but an absence, the absence of obligation, of visibility, of chains. She had touched his world and walked away from it, and Silas Kane, who had spent decades acquiring everything and everyone worth having, found himself paralyzed by a question he could not answer. "What do you do with someone who wants nothing? Should I make contact?" Nico asked, breaking the silence. "Establish surveillance. We can have eyes on her within the hour." Silas considered the question longer than he should have. Surveillance was standard protocol. Safe, distant. The rational choice for a man who had built his life on rational choices. But rationality had abandoned him 3 nights ago in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and regret. "No," he said finally. "I'll handle this one myself." Nico's expression shifted, a flicker of surprise quickly suppressed behind years of professional composure. He had seen Silas delegate executions, negotiations, entire operations worth millions of dollars. He had never seen him insist on handling something personally without strategic necessity. For the first time in years, Nico Vance looked at his boss and saw something he did not recognize. Hesitation. 1 week. 7 days of double shifts and sleepless nights and jumping every time the diner door swung open. 7 days of examining every stranger's face for the sharp angles and heavy gaze she could not scrub from her memory. 7 days of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the black envelope's promise to reveal its true cost. The key still sat in her dresser drawer, untouched. She had not visited the address. She had not searched it online. She had simply buried it beneath a stack of old receipts and pretended it did not exist, the same way she pretended that the man who sent it had already forgotten her name. On the 8th night, he walked back through the door. Ivy was refilling coffee for a trucker in the corner booth when the temperature in the room shifted. She did not need to look up to know who had entered. Her body recognized him before her eyes did. The sudden tightness in her chest, the way her pulse quickened against her will, the instinctive urge to find the nearest exit and calculate the steps required to reach it. She looked up anyway. Silas Kane stood just inside the entrance, wearing a different coat but carrying the same presence. His eyes found her immediately, as if he had memorized her location before the door finished closing behind him. He did not smile, did not wave, did not do any of the normal things normal customers did when entering a diner at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. He simply watched her, waiting. Ivy finished pouring the trucker's coffee with hands that refused to tremble no matter how loudly her instincts screamed. She returned the pot to the burner, wiped her palms on her apron, and forced herself to breathe. He had chosen a booth in the far corner. not her section. The tables she covered were on the opposite side of the diner, near the windows and the emergency exit she had identified her first week on the job. He had deliberately positioned himself outside her territory, which meant he was not here for service. He was here for her. She could ignore him. Stay in her section, serve her tables. Let one of the other waitresses handle whatever he ordered. She could pretend he was just another late-night customer with insomnia and poor dining choices. She could avoid him until her shift ended and hope he grew tired of waiting. But Ivy had spent enough of her life running from things that eventually caught up anyway. Sometimes the only way out was through. She crossed the diner floor with measured steps, stopping at the edge of his booth without sliding into the seat across from him. Standing gave her the advantage of height. It also gave her the option of walking away. "You came back," she said. "I had questions. I already gave you your wallet." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made the air feel thinner. "That's not what I'm asking about." Ivy's fingers curled against her apron. "Then what?" Silas gestured to the seat across from him. Not a command, an invitation. The distinction mattered, though she could not have explained why. She sat down, kept her back straight, kept her hands visible on the table between them, kept every wall she had ever built firmly in place. "The envelope," she said. "The key." "What was that?" A gesture. Gestures don't come with addresses and house keys. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make her stomach tighten. "It's a property I own. Empty. Safe. I thought you might want somewhere to go if your current situation became uncomfortable." "My current situation is fine." "Your current situation is a 400 square foot apartment above a laundromat in a neighborhood where 3 assaults were reported last month." He said it without judgment, without pity, just facts. "I did my research." The admission should have terrified her. A man like him, digging into her life, cataloguing her vulnerabilities like inventory to be leveraged later. But the terror she expected did not arrive. Instead, she felt something closer to exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had spent too long waiting for the trap to spring. "Why?" she asked. "Why research me? Why come back? Why any of this?" Silas leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them by inches that felt like miles. "Because I don't understand you, and I need to understand things." "There's nothing to understand. I found your wallet. I returned it. End of story." "You returned $100,000 when you have 12 in your bank account. That's not the end of a story. That's the beginning of one."
Ivy's jaw tightened.
He had done more than research her living situation. He had dug into her finances, her patterns, the architecture of her invisible life. He knew exactly how broke she was when she pushed that money away. "What do you want me to say?" she asked quietly. "That I'm noble. That I'm honest? That I have some grand moral code that prevented me from taking what could have changed my entire life? I want you to tell me the truth, not the version you tell yourself. The real one." The silence between them stretched until Ivy could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She should lie, should give him something he could accept and move on, some sanitized explanation that would satisfy his curiosity and send him back to whatever world he came from. But she was tired of lying, tired of performing, tired of being invisible to everyone except the one man she desperately wished would stop seeing her. "Because the moment I took your money," she said slowly, "I would belong to you, and I don't belong to anyone." The words landed between them like a blade striking stone. Silas did not flinch, did not argue, did not offer reassurances that his money came without strings. Instead, he looked at her with an expression she could not read, something between recognition and regret, between hunger and restraint. He looked at her like she had just spoken a language he understood better than anyone, a language he had spent his entire life teaching others to speak. He had built an empire on ownership, on acquiring people, places, power, on the fundamental belief that everything worth having could be bought if the price was right. Ivy Reynolds had just told him she could not be purchased at any price, and instead of dismissing her, instead of calculating new angles of approach, Silas Kane heard her words and felt something crack open in his chest. She was the first person who had ever made him question whether ownership was the same as connection. He stood without ordering anything, reached into his coat and placed a business card on the table between them. Blank white, heavy cardstock, nothing but a phone number printed in black ink. "If you ever need anything," he said. "No strings, no obligations, no ownership." He left without another word. Ivy sat alone in the booth, staring at the card like it might bite her. She should throw it away, should burn it, bury it, pretend this conversation never happened. She put it in her pocket instead. The next morning her phone rang at 7:15. Her landlord's voice on the other end, confused and slightly suspicious, explaining that someone had paid her rent for the next 6 months. Anonymously, untraceable, with a note delivered in a black envelope that said only, "Not a debt, not an obligation, just because." Ivy hung up the phone and sat on the edge of her bed, the business card still in her pocket, the key still in her drawer, and a question burning in her chest that she could not answer. For the first time in her life, Ivy Reynolds did not know whether to be grateful or terrified. Ivy spent 2 days trying to trace the payment. She called her landlord 4 times, asked for receipts, demanded records, searched for any thread she could pull that might reveal the source. Every inquiry led to the same dead end. Cash payment, no name attached, delivered by a courier service that had no record of who hired them. The man who paid 6 months of her rent had made himself invisible. The irony was not lost on her. By the 3rd day, Ivy stopped searching and started watching. She had survived this long by reading patterns, by noticing the small shifts that preceded larger storms. And something in her environment had changed, something she could feel even if she could not yet see. The car appeared on day 4, a black sedan with tinted windows, parked across the street from her building in a space that had been empty for months. It arrived before sunrise and stayed until long after dark. The plates were local. The driver never emerged. Every morning when Ivy left for her shift, she felt eyes tracking her movements from behind that darkened glass. She told herself it could be coincidence. A new tenant. A visiting relative. 100 innocent explanations that did not involve the man from the diner or the wallet she should have left beneath that booth. She did not believe any of them. The diner changed too. Lou Brennan, the owner, had always been gruff but predictable, a man who paid on time, complained about overhead, and left his employees alone as long as the coffee stayed hot and the customers stayed happy. But something had shifted in his demeanour. He flinched when the phone rang. He checked the parking lot before locking up. He looked at Ivy with an expression that hovered somewhere between pity and fear, like she had contracted a disease he did not want to catch. "Everything okay, Lou?" she asked one evening, catching him staring at her from behind the register. He looked away too quickly. "Fine. Everything's fine." The regulars started disappearing. Eddie Morrow, who had come in every Thursday for 6 years, stopped showing up. The nurses from the hospital down the street who always ordered pie after their overnight shifts found a new place to eat. Even the drunks who stumbled in at closing time seemed to sense something and chose different establishments for their late-night eggs and regret. Gino's all-night grill had always been invisible. Now it felt quarantined. Ivy did not know the name Silas Kane. She did not understand the weight it carried, the doors it opened and closed, the lives it reshaped with a single phone call. But she understood reach. She understood the way powerful men left fingerprints on everything they touched, even when they tried to touch gently. Someone had reached into her world, and whether that reach was protection or surveillance or something else entirely, it had made her visible in ways she could not undo. The confrontation came on a Friday night, 40 minutes after her shift ended. Ivy was walking to her car in the back lot, keys already in her hand, pepper spray accessible in her jacket pocket. The parking lot lights had been flickering for weeks, casting the asphalt in intermittent darkness that made every shadow feel like a threat. She was 10 feet from her vehicle when she heard footsteps behind her. Ivy Reynolds. She turned. The man standing under the dying light was not Silas Kane. This man was shorter, broader, with a face that had absorbed too many blows and eyes that had witnessed too many things worth forgetting. He wore no tailored coat. His hands hung loose at his sides, relaxed in a way that suggested violence was a language he spoke fluently and often. "Who's asking?" Ivy kept her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Someone with questions." He stepped closer, closing the distance between them to something that felt like a threat. "About a wallet. About what you found inside it." Ivy's stomach dropped. "I returned it. Whatever was in there, I didn't take anything." "I know you returned it. That's not what concerns me." His eyes narrowed, scanning her face like he was searching for cracks in a wall. "What concerns me is what you saw, what you might remember. Names, numbers, anything that doesn't belong in the head of a waitress making $9 an hour. I didn't look at anything. I saw cash. That's it." "You sure about that?" He took another step forward, close enough now that she could smell cigarettes and something metallic on his breath. "Because the man you return that wallet to has enemies. And those enemies are very interested in what was inside, very interested in anyone who might have seen something useful. The wallet. She had thought it was just money, a small fortune someone careless had left behind. But standing here, facing this man whose presence promised pain, she understood how wrong she had been. That wallet contained more than cash. It contained information. leverage. Secrets that men like this would kill to acquire and kill again to protect. And she had touched it, held it, looked inside. Her fingerprints were on something she could not wash away. I don't know anything, Ivy said. I'm nobody. I work at a diner and I go home. That's my entire life. The man studied her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his expression, not belief, but calculation. A predator deciding whether the prey was worth the effort. Maybe, he said finally, or maybe you're smarter than you look. Either way, people are going to come asking. And when they do, you better hope your answers satisfy them. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot lights. Ivy stood frozen, her keys cutting into her palm, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack through. Now I need you to really think about this. Ivy has spent her entire life building invisibility, and in one moment it all came crashing down. If you were her right now, standing in that parking lot with a target on your back, would you run? Or would you stay and face whatever comes next? Like this video and tell me in the comments, because Ivy's about to make a choice and I want to know what you would do in her place. That night, Ivy packed a bag, one change of clothes, the cash she kept hidden in her mattress, the business card with the phone number she had told herself she would never use. She moved through her apartment like a ghost evacuating a haunted house, touching nothing, leaving nothing, erasing herself from yet another space that had briefly felt like home. She would go to the bus station, buy a ticket to anywhere, disappear into a new city with a new name and rebuild the invisible life that had just been shattered. She had done it before. She could do it again. Ivy grabbed her bag and opened the door. Silas Kane was standing in the hallway. He looked different than he had in the diner. The control was still there, the authority that seemed woven into his posture, like steel threads in fabric. But his face carried something new, an urgency she had not seen before, a tension in his jaw that suggested he had come not to collect but to warn. Going somewhere? He asked. Ivy gripped her bag tighter. I'm leaving. Tonight. Right now. Silas shook his head slowly, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a single word. It's too late for that, he said. They're already watching the station, the highways, every exit out of this city. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle into the space between them. Running is no longer an option. Ivy stood in the doorway of her apartment, bag clutched against her chest like a shield, staring at the man who had just told her that escape was no longer possible. The hallway stretched behind him, dim and empty, the same hallway she had walked 1,000 times without ever imagining it would become a dead end. How did you find me? She asked. I've known where you live since the night you returned my wallet. Silas's voice carried no apology. I've had someone watching your building for 2 weeks. Not surveillance. Protection. The black sedan. Yes. Ivy's grip tightened on her bag. You've been watching me this whole time. Tracking my movements. Digging into my life, and you expect me to believe you're here to help? I expect you to believe what I'm about to tell you. Silas glanced down the hallway, then back at her face. But not out here. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to slam the door, climb out the window, find another way out that did not involve trusting a man whose name she still did not know. But the memory of the stranger in the parking lot, his questions, his threats, the cold calculation in his eyes, reminded her that the danger outside was no longer theoretical. She stepped back and let him enter. Her apartment looked smaller with him in it. The walls seemed to contract around his presence, shrinking the space until Ivy could feel the weight of him in every corner. He did not sit, did not touch anything. He simply stood in the center of the room and waited for her to close the door behind them. The wallet, he began, contained more than money. There were account numbers, contact lists, names of people who work for me and names of people who work against me. Information that, in the wrong hands, could dismantle everything I've built and put targets on the backs of everyone connected to me. Ivy set her bag down slowly. I didn't look at any of that. I saw the cash and I closed it. I believe you. But the people looking for that information don't care what you actually saw. They care what you might have seen, what you might remember, what you might be convinced to remember under the right pressure. His jaw tightened. The man who approached you tonight works for someone who has been trying to destroy me for years. He wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to assess whether you were useful or disposable. The word landed like a punch to her stomach. Disposable. She had spent her entire life trying to be invisible, and now invisibility had become the very thing that made her expendable. You made yourself a target the moment you returned that wallet, Silas continued. If you had taken the money and disappeared, they might have assumed you were just a thief. Unimportant. Not worth pursuing, but you returned it. You touched something valuable and gave it back. That kind of integrity makes people nervous. I didn't ask for this. Ivy's voice cracked despite her effort to keep it steady. I didn't ask for your wallet. I didn't ask for your money. I didn't ask for any of this. Silas met her eyes with an expression that held no pity, only recognition. But it found you anyway. Silence filled the apartment, thick and heavy. Ivy leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted by the weight of a situation she had never chosen and could not escape. She had played by the rules her entire life. She had stayed small, stayed quiet, stayed out of the way of people and problems that were bigger than her, and none of it had mattered. None of it had protected her. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. "Really? Not to warn me. You could have done that with a phone call or another black envelope. Why show up in person? Why any of this?" Silas did not answer immediately. He turned toward the window, looking out at the alley below where nothing good ever happened, and for a moment he seemed smaller somehow, not diminished, but contained, like he was holding something back that threatened to overflow. "I've spent 20 years building an empire," he said quietly, "acquiring things, people, power. I've learnt every language that matters in my world. Money, fear, leverage, loyalty. I know how to buy men and how to break them. I know how to make problems disappear and opportunities appear. I know how to control everything and everyone around me." He turned back to face her, and something in his expression had shifted. The control was still there, but beneath it, Ivy saw something she had not expected, something that looked almost like confusion. "But you," he continued, "I don't know how to control. I don't know how to buy. I don't know how to make you want anything from me because you don't. You looked at $100,000 and pushed it away. You looked at protection and resources and opportunity and wanted none of it." He paused, the words seeming to cost him something. "You're the first person in 10 years who looked at everything I am and wanted none of it, and I don't know what to do with that." The confession hung between them like a thread stretched to breaking. Ivy stared at him, seeing for the first time past the tailored coat and the heavy presence and the authority that bent rooms to his will. She saw a man who had spent so long acquiring things that he had forgotten what it felt like to be chosen instead of purchased. She saw loneliness, wearing a mask of power. "I'm not special," she said softly. "I'm just tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of building walls. Tired of surviving instead of living." She exhaled slowly. "I pushed your money away because I was scared of what taking it would cost me. Not because I'm noble, because I learned a long time ago that nothing comes free." "I know." Silas took a step toward her, close enough now that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the evidence of years spent carrying weights no one else could see. "I read your file. I know about your mother. Your father. I know why you built the life you built. And I know how much it cost you. Then you understand why I can't trust you."
I understand why you shouldn't.
His voice dropped lower, almost gentle. "But I'm asking you to anyway, not because you owe me, not because I've earned it. Because right now, in this moment, I'm the only thing standing between you and people who will not stop until they find what they're looking for." Ivy's heart hammered against her ribs. She should tell him to leave. Should push him out the door and take her chances with the exits he claimed were blocked. She should do what she had always done, run, hide, rebuild somewhere else where no one knew her name. But she was so tired of running, so tired of starting over, so tired of being alone in rooms that never felt like home. "What happens now?" she asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. A question she had no business asking. A question that cracked open a door she had spent years keeping sealed. Silas looked at her for a long moment, and when he answered, his voice carried something she had not heard from him before. Not control, not calculation, honesty. "I don't know," he said, "but I don't want to find out alone." The silence in the apartment stretched long enough to become its own kind of conversation. Ivy remained against the wall, arms crossed over her chest, watching the man who had just admitted something she suspected he had never said aloud to anyone. Silas stood in the center of her cramped living space, surrounded by evidence of a life built on minimalism and fear, waiting for a response she did not know how to give. "I can get you out," he said finally. "Tonight." Before they tightened their surveillance any further, Ivy frowned. "You just told me all the exits are blocked. They're blocked for someone trying to leave alone. They're not blocked for someone leaving with my resources behind them." He reached into his coat and produced a manila envelope she had not noticed him carrying. New identity, new documents, a plane ticket to a city where no one will look for you, and enough money to start over without needing to work for at least 2 years. He placed the envelope on her small kitchen table, next to the stack of overdue bills she had stopped opening weeks ago. "This is not manipulation," he continued. This is not a trap. This is the cleanest exit I can give you. No strings, no obligations, no debt. You take this envelope, walk out of this building, and my people will get you to the airport before sunrise. By tomorrow afternoon, Ivy Reynolds will cease to exist, and whoever you choose to become will be free of everything that happened here. Ivy stared at the envelope like it might catch fire. A new identity, a new life. Everything she had spent years building on her own, handed to her in a single package by a man she had known for less than 3 weeks. Why? She asked. Why give me this? If I disappear, you get nothing. No answers. No resolution. No, she trailed off, uncertain how to finish the sentence. No what? No connection? Comets. No chance to explore whatever this fragile, impossible thing was that had grown between them in diner booths and midnight confessions. Silas met her eyes without flinching. Because you deserve a choice. A real one. Not the kind that comes with conditions attached or consequences hidden in the fine print. He paused, something shifting in his expression. I've spent my entire life taking choices away from people, forcing outcomes, engineering situations where the answer I wanted was the only answer available. I don't want to do that with you, but there's another option. Ivy heard the words leave her mouth before she consciously decided to speak them. You said running is no longer possible, but you also came here in person. Which means there's something else, something you're not saying. Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the apartment. You could stay. 3 words. Simple. Devastating. Stay, Ivy repeated. Here, in this city, with people hunting for information they think I have. Stay under my protection. Let me handle the threat. Let my people ensure that no one touches you while I dismantle the network that sent that man to find you. He took a breath, and Ivy watched something vulnerable flicker across his face before he contained it. And see what this becomes. Whatever it is, whatever you want it to be. The offer hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Ivy understood what he was asking, not for her body or her loyalty or her service. He was asking for her presence, her choice to remain in his orbit when every rational instinct told her to flee. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, distant but clear. Men like this don't give you choices, baby. They give you illusions of choices. The exit that looks free always has a price tag you don't see until it's too late. But her mother had never met a man who admitted he did not know what to do. Her mother had never seen someone powerful enough to take what he wanted, choose to ask instead. Ivy walked to the kitchen table and picked up the envelope. She could feel the weight of it in her hands. The documents, the cash, the promise of erasure. Everything she had ever wanted. A clean slate. A fresh start. Another chance to disappear into the margins and build a life so small that no one would ever find her. But she had been disappearing for 24 years, and in all that time she had never once felt found. Until now. If I stayed, she said slowly, still holding the envelope, what would you want from me? The question stripped away everything else, the danger, the protection, the logistics of escape. It reduced the moment to its essential core. A woman asking a man what he expected in exchange for his offer. Silas did not hesitate, did not calculate, did not search for the answer that would secure the outcome he wanted. Nothing you don't choose to give. 7 words, spoken without performance or strategy. Spoken with the quiet honesty of a man who had finally stopped trying to control the conversation. Ivy felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, opening. A door she had welded shut so long ago she had forgotten it existed. She thought of all the years she had spent building walls, constructing an invisible fortress around a heart that had been wounded too many times to risk exposure. She thought of the loneliness that had become so familiar it felt like home. She thought of her mother chasing miracles that turned into nightmares, and her father walking out a door he never walked back through, and every lesson she had learned about the cost of needing anyone. And then she thought of this man, this dangerous, powerful, broken man who had looked at her refusal and seen something worth pursuing, who had tracked her across the city not to possess her but to protect her, who stood in her crumbling apartment offering her freedom and asking for nothing except the chance to find out what happened if she stayed. She had spent her whole life avoiding connection because connection meant vulnerability, but standing here, holding an envelope that represented everything she had ever wanted, Ivy realized something she had never allowed herself to consider. Safety without connection was just a different kind of prison. She looked at the bag she had packed, the clothes, the cash, the fragments of a life designed for disappearance. Then she looked at the man who had turned her invisible life upside down. She made her decision. Not with words. Words could be taken back, reinterpreted, denied. Words were what people used when they wanted to leave doors open for retreat. Ivy set the envelope back on the table, unopened. She picked up her bag, carried it to the corner of the room, and set it down with a finality that echoed louder than any sentence she could have spoken. Then she turned to face Silas Kane and let him see the answer in her eyes. She was staying. Ivy did not leave the city. She did not move into a penthouse on the 52nd floor, or accept a new apartment in a safer neighborhood, or take any of the dozen offers Silas made in the weeks that followed. She stayed exactly where she was, 400 square feet above a laundromat, creaking stairs, a window overlooking an alley where nothing good ever happened. But something had changed. She stopped paying rent in cash. She renewed her driver's license. She opened a bank account with her real name and deposited her paychecks like someone who expected to exist in the same place long enough for it to matter. Small changes, invisible to anyone who was not paying attention. Silas was paying attention. The threat disappeared the way threats in his world always disappeared, quietly, completely, without details that required explanation. Ivy did not ask what happened to the man who had approached her in the parking lot. She did not ask about the rival who had sent him or the information in the wallet that had started everything. Silas did not offer. Some doors were better left closed, and both of them understood that opening them would change the shape of whatever they were building. They existed in a space that had no name, not together, not apart, not lovers, not strangers, not friends. Something else, something that lived in the margins of definition, refusing to be categorized or contained. Silas stopped by the diner once a week, sometimes twice. He never sat in her section. He simply occupied a booth in the corner, ordered coffee he barely touched, and watched her work. Occasionally their eyes would meet across the room and something would pass between them. Acknowledgement, recognition, a conversation conducted entirely in silence. She never went to him. He never summoned her. The distance between them remained constant, measured not in feet but in choice. Every night she did not cross the diner to sit across from him was a night she chose to maintain the boundary. Every night he did not approach her was a night he chose to respect it. 4 weeks after the night in her apartment, he broke the pattern. Ivy was refilling sugar dispensers at the counter when she heard the booth creak behind her. She turned and found him standing there, closer than he had been since he showed up in her hallway, and told her running was no longer an option. "You're out of your section," she said. "I wanted to ask you something." She set down the sugar dispenser and waited. "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. Not because it was unexpected, but because it was simple. No strategy behind it. No angle. Just a man asking a woman whether the choice she made had been the right one. Ivy considered lying, considered deflecting with humor or redirecting with a question of her own, but she had stopped hiding, and hiding included hiding the truth from people who had earned the right to hear it. "I don't know if happy is the right word," she said slowly, "but I'm not running anymore. I'm not looking over my shoulder every time I leave my apartment. I'm not calculating how quickly I could pack a bag and disappear." She paused, searching for the words that would make him understand. "I feel like I'm actually living somewhere instead of just surviving until the next place." Silas nodded slowly. Something softened in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close enough to make her chest tighten. "Good," he said. "That's good." He turned to leave. Stopped. Looked back at her one more time. "The offer still stands," he said quietly. "All of it. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready." Ivy understood what he meant. The protection, the resources, the door to his world that remained open despite every time she had chosen not to walk through it. "I know," she said, "and the answer is still the same. Nothing I don't choose to give." For a moment neither of them moved. The diner hummed around them. The clatter of dishes, the murmur of late-night customers, the hiss of the coffee maker. But the noise felt distant, muffled, like the world had agreed to give them this one small pocket of silence. Then Silas Kane walked out the door, and Ivy Reynolds went back to refilling sugar dispensers, and the distance between them settled into something that felt less like separation and more like promise. 3 hours later, she locked up the diner and stepped into the parking lot. The night air was cold, carrying the first hints of autumn, and her breath formed small clouds that disappeared as quickly as they came. She saw him immediately. Across the street, leaning against the black sedan that no longer felt like surveillance. He made no move to approach. No gesture of invitation. He simply stood there, watching her the way he had watched her that first night, like she was a question he was still trying to answer. Ivy did not cross the street, did not wave, did not pretend she had not seen him. She simply stood there, letting him see her, letting herself be seen, and for the first time in her life the exposure did not feel like danger. It felt like beginning. That is the story. A broke waitress, a mafia boss, $100,000, and a single word that changed everything. If this ending surprised you, or moved you, or left you thinking about what comes next for Ivy and Silas, drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and if you want more stories that stay with you long after they end, subscribe to this channel, because there are more coming, and I promise they will be worth your time. Some people enter your life like fire, burning everything you built. Others enter like gravity, quiet, invisible, impossible to escape. Ivy Reynolds never asked for either, but standing in that parking lot, watching the one man who had seen her and still let her choose, she understood something she had spent her whole life running from. The most dangerous thing in the world is not being found, it is being known, and wanting to be known in return.